Okay, so the next topic we're going to cover is adjustment tools. So the adjustment tools are what we use to adjust the image, manipulate the pixels to have the image look how we want it to look. So that may mean making it darker, making it brighter, giving it more contrast, adjusting many different aspects of the image to get it to look as good as it can look. What I'm going to show you first is using the adjustment tools in what we call a destructive manner, and I'll explain a little bit as I go through what that means. When we're processing this file and when we're making these adjustments, we can make destructive changes or non-destructive changes. So at the moment we're going to go through and show you the basics of the adjustment tools, which technically is destructive because it's very hard to go back and make changes on what you do later on. Okay, so in order to make an adjustment, we need to go up into the menu where we see image and come down and we have adjustments. Now you have a whole selection of adjustments here, and first of all we're just going to very quickly and simply click on the brightness and contrast adjustment. Okay, so it's very simple. It's exactly as it sounds. We can brighten the image or take away brightness. When you take away the brightness, you'll find it flattens the file somewhat. Okay, now you may want to bring it down a touch, add some contrast. The more contrast you add, you can see it intensifying color. Now we're also making at this point in time what we call a global change. Now a global change means we're affecting the whole of the image. Later on we'll be making selections and affecting only parts of the image at any given time. We may only want to affect the sky in this adjustment. We may only want to affect the sand. We may only want to affect this white building on the very end here. So there's lots of ways of making these selections and adjusting only certain parts of the image. Generally when I'm working on an image, I'll choose to work on the sky first, maybe then the sand, the water. I do it all separately, and I may do some global changes, but generally most of my adjustments are selective. Okay, but as you see, we can make some changes here. I'm not doing anything special. I really just want to demonstrate the changes we're making. Once we hit OK, that change has now been made to this layer. Remember, we've still got our original layer, and by switching the eye on and off, we can see the adjustment we made and what the original file looked like. It's a very little change made. So we might go up in here into our adjustments again, and we may pick we may have a look at exposure. Now the exposure is exactly what it sounds. If you haven't got the correct exposure in the image, you might want to adjust that. So what we can do is this gamma correction and the offset. Again, move the sliders and see what they do. You can see how this makes it really, I suppose, really flat and then really intense. It's not something I use very often, but it's good to play around with these controls and see what they do. Gamma correction is something I use very sparingly, and by taking away, as in you start at 1, you go down to 0.8 or 0.9 and so on, you can see it adjusting the color very slightly. So it's darkening down, giving a more of a contrast look to the image. If we hit OK, we apply those changes on a permanent basis, and they are applied to this layer. Okay, so again, if we hit on and off, you can see the changes we're making. They're subtle, but they're changes all the same. Now again, we're making global changes, we're affecting the whole image, and we are doing it in a destructive manner. And what I mean by destructive manner is, if I decide when I did my first adjustment, I brightened the image up and I added some contrast, and I decide I'd like to change that, well, I can't adjust it anymore. The change has been made, it's been applied, and I've made more changes since then. There is something we can do. We can go into the history panel, and these panels up here, they can all be added and subtracted from your panel here. And by doing that, we go into the window and we simply click on one of these here, and I've chosen history already. So by clicking history, it will disappear, and by going back in and clicking history again, it will reappear. Normally when it appears, it's out here like this, and all you have to do is drag it over, and when you get that blue outline around the box, let it go and it goes in. You can actually adjust these, move them around. You can take it down to the next one and put it in there if you like. It's entirely up to you how you want to set this up. But if we go back in history, you can see all the adjustments, all the different things from the very start. It holds about, I think it's about by default 20 moves in history, but you can adjust that to 50 or 100. It can slow down the process if you have too many in there. At any given time, we can go back to the brightness, and it will now show us that, listen, this is when we added the brightness and contrast, but we lose our exposure. We can't go back to here and get rid of that without losing everything. So this is what I mean by destructive. It's not something that I like to do. I like to have control to be able to go back and change things. We'll cover that when we get to layers. Okay, so we can go on and make as many changes as we like to this this image, but we're making global changes. Okay, so you need to understand everything we do here is a global change affecting the whole image. And in the next video, we're going to discuss how we can start actually making selections and only affecting part of the image. Okay, see you in the next video.